Chapter 63 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 63. The professional gentleman who had given Kit the consolatory piece of information relative to the settlement of his trifle of business at the Old Bailey, and the probability of its being very soon disposed of, turned out to be quite correct in his prognostications. In 8 days' time the sessions commenced. In 1 day afterwards, the grand jury found a true bill against Christopher Nubbles for felony, and in 2 days from that finding, the aforesaid Christopher Nubbles was called upon to plead guilty or not guilty to an indictment for that he the said Christopher did feloniously abstract and steal from the dwelling house and office of one Sampson Brass, gentleman, 1 bank note for £5, issued by the Governor and Company of the Bank of England, in contravention of the statutes in that case made and provided, and against the peace of our sovereign lord the King, his crown and dignity. To this indictment Christopher Nubbles, in a low and trembling voice, pleaded not guilty. And here, let those who are in the habit of forming hasty judgments from appearances, and who would have had Christopher, if innocent, speak out very strong and loud, observe that confinement and anxiety will subdue the stoutest hearts, and that to one who has been close shut up, though it be only for 10 or 11 days, seeing but stone walls and a very few stony faces, the sudden entrance into a great hall filled with life is rather a disconcerting and startling circumstance. To this it must be added that life in a wig is to a large class of people much more terrifying and impressive than life with its own head of hair. And if, in addition to these considerations, there be taken into account Kit's natural emotion on seeing the 2 Mr Garlands and the little notary looking on with pale and anxious faces, it will perhaps seem matter of no very great wonder that he should have been rather out of sorts and unable to make himself quite at home. Although he had never seen either of the Mr Garlands or Mr Witherden since the time of his arrest, he had been given to understand that they had employed counsel for him. Therefore, when one of the gentlemen in wigs got up and said, "I am for the prisoner, my lord," Kit made him a bow. And when another gentleman in a wig got up and said, "And I am against him, my lord," Kit trembled very much and bowed to him too. And didn't he hope in his own heart that his gentleman was a match for the other gentleman, and would make him ashamed of himself in no time? The gentleman who was against him had to speak first, and being in dreadfully good spirits, for he had in the last trial very nearly procured the acquittal of a young gentleman who had had the misfortune to murder his father, he spoke up, you may be sure, telling the jury that if they acquitted this prisoner, they must expect to suffer no less pangs and agonies than he had told the other jury they would certainly undergo if they convicted that prisoner. And when he had told them all about the case, and that he had never known a worse case, he stopped a little while, like a man who had something terrible to tell them, and then said that he understood an attempt would be made by his learned friend, and here he looked sideways at Kit's gentleman, to impeach the testimony of those immaculate witnesses whom he should call before them, but he did hope and trust that his learned friend would have a greater respect and veneration for the character of the prosecutor, than whom, as he well knew, there did not exist and never had existed a more honourable member of that most honourable profession to which he was attached. And then he said, did the jury know Bevis Marks? And if they did know Bevis Marks, as he trusted for their own character they did they know the historical and elevating associations connected with that most remarkable spot? Did they believe that a man like Brass could reside in a place like Bevis Marks, and not be a virtuous and most upright character? And when he had said a great deal to them on this point, he remembered that it was an insult to their understandings to make any remarks on what they must have felt so strongly without him, and therefore called Sampson Brass into the witness box straightway. Then up comes Mr Brass, very brisk and fresh, and, having bowed to the judge like a man who has had the pleasure of seeing him before, and who hopes he has been pretty well since their last meeting, folds his arms and looks at his gentleman as much as to say, "Here I am, full of evidence, tap me." And the gentleman does tap him presently, and with great discretion too, drawing off the evidence by little and little, and making it run quite clear and bright in the eyes of all present. Then Kit's gentleman takes him in hand, but can make nothing of him, and after a great many very long questions and very short answers, Mr Sampson Brass goes down in glory. To him succeeds Sarah, who in like manner is easy to be managed by Mr Brass's gentleman, but very obdurate to Kit's. In short, Kit's gentleman can get nothing out of her but a repetition of what she has said before, only a little stronger this time as against his client, and therefore lets her go in some confusion. Then Mr Brass's gentleman calls Richard Swiveller, and Richard Swiveller appears accordingly. Now, Mr Brass's gentleman has it whispered in his ear that this witness is disposed to be friendly to the prisoner, which, to say the truth, he is rather glad to hear, as his strength is considered to lie in what is familiarly termed badgering. Wherefore he begins by requesting the officer to be quite sure that his witness kisses the book, then goes to work at him tooth and nail. 'Mr Swiveller,' says this gentleman to Dick, when he had told his tale with evident reluctance and a desire to make the best of it. 'Pray, sir, where did you dine yesterday?' 'Where did I dine yesterday?' 'Ay, sir, where did you dine yesterday? Was it near here, sir?' 'Oh, to be sure, yes, just over the way.' 'To be sure, yes, just over the way,' repeats Mr Brass's gentleman with a glance at the court. 'Alone, sir?' 'I beg your pardon,' says Mr Swiveller, who has not caught the question. 'Alone, sir,' repeats Mr Brass's gentleman in a voice of thunder. 'Did you dine alone? Did you treat anybody, sir? Come!' 'Oh, yes, to be sure, yes, I did,' says Mr Swiveller with a smile. 'Have the goodness to banish a levity, sir, which is very ill suited to the place in which you stand, though perhaps you have reason to be thankful that it's only that place,' says Mr Brass's gentleman, with a nod of the head insinuating that the dock is Mr Swiveller's legitimate sphere of action. 'And attend to me. You were waiting about here yesterday, in expectation that this trial was coming on. You dined over the way. You treated somebody. Now, was that somebody brother to the prisoner at the bar?' Mr Swiveller is proceeding to explain. 'Yes or no, sir?' cries Mr Brass's gentleman. 'But will you allow me?' 'Yes or no, sir?' 'Yes, but it was.' 'Yes, it was,' cries the gentleman, taking him up short. 'And a very pretty witness you are.' Down sits Mr Brass's gentleman. Kit's gentleman, not knowing how the matter really stands, is afraid to pursue the subject. Richard Swiveller retires abashed. Judge, jury, and spectators have visions of his lounging about with an ill-looking, large-whiskered, dissolute young fellow of 6 feet high. The reality is little Jacob, with the calves of his legs exposed to the open air, and himself tied up in a shawl. Nobody knows the truth. Everybody believes a falsehood, and all because of the ingenuity of Mr Brass's gentleman. Then come the witnesses to character, and here Mr Brass's gentleman shines again. It turns out that Mr Garland has had no character with Kit, no recommendation of him but from his own mother, and that he was suddenly dismissed by his former master for unknown reasons. 'Really, Mr Garland,' says Mr Brass's gentleman, 'for a person who has arrived at your time of life, you are, to say the least of it, singularly indiscreet, I think.' The jury think so too, and find Kit guilty. He is taken off, humbly protesting his innocence. The spectators settle themselves in their places with renewed attention, for there are several female witnesses to be examined in the next case, and it has been rumoured that Mr Brass's gentleman will make great fun in cross-examining them for the prisoner. Kit's mother, poor woman, is waiting at the grate below stairs, accompanied by Barbara's mother, who, honest soul,